Is Games Workshop in real trouble? That is today's question, and your first thought might be, why are we even asking that question? So there's two main things that we're going to take a look at. We're going to have a look at Games Workshop stock prices and its financials, as well as the long-term disruptive impact that 3D printing is probably going to have on the industry as a whole, and how that might impact GW. So let's talk about the financials first. Now this video is a little bit badly timed because the financials for the whole year end are actually due in about a month's time, and the last data that we have is actually from January this year, so just keep that in mind. However, if we do look at the financials that Games Workshop gave at the start of the year, profits were down. The horror. So they were obviously still making a profit, it's just that the amount of profit they're making isn't as much as it used to be. Now in this video I'm not really going to talk about the exact details, what has caused that, what hasn't, and that kind of thing. Suffice to say that Games Workshop pretty much benefited from COVID. Now I know COVID obviously was bad overall, but if you look at Games Workshop financials, they definitely did benefit. And one thing that shows to me, which I did sort of expect but I maybe didn't realize quite how much, is that actually I think it shows just how many pure hobbyists there are amongst the community as opposed to pure wargamers. For me, my interest is purely in the actual wargaming element. I'm not really into painting, so during COVID I pretty much stopped my activities. Like I wasn't playing the game and I wasn't really painting an army because I wasn't going to be playing the game. I only ever really do the hobby so that I can play the game, and if you take that away from me, then I'm doing what? Nothing. So I pretty much took my foot off the gas and I wasn't really invested in the community basically, or in the hobby as a whole. However, I obviously seem to be in the minority. It seems that lots of people purely enjoy the hobby. So being stuck at home during COVID, a lot of people got their paintbrushes out and started painting and enjoying themselves like that, which is fair enough. I'm not saying you're wrong, it's personal choice obviously. And more importantly, Games Workshop profited. So now they're making less profit than they used to. Well, it's probably just it returning to normality, if that makes sense. COVID was obviously a special circumstance and it's just returning back to the way that it used to be and the way that it probably ought to be in a way. So if we have a look at the stock price though, if you look at it just in the last 6 months or the last 12 months, you will see that the stock price has plummeted. It's pretty much gone down by about half. But if we zoom out and look at it maybe like from a 5-year position, we can see the effect that COVID had. The initial effect was actually that the whole stock market sort of dropped and plummeted, but Games Workshop quickly recovered and started increasing in its value. The stock price started going up and it continued to go all the way up until about September 2021, and since then the stock price has been falling and is sort of continuing to fall, and it's now around where the stock price was when COVID actually started. So the bump that it experienced has all gone away. Now as I said earlier, we will know more about the financials with regards to Games Workshop in about a month. If they report record profits, then the stock price will go up. If they report even less profits than they reported last time, then the stock price will probably dip briefly, right? But for me, we're at a pivotal moment for Games Workshop in more ways than one. Even if the financials and the stock price simply stabilize at the pre-COVID level, I still think Games Workshop have some things they need to address. But unfortunately, one of them might be out of their control. There currently is essentially a crisis in worldwide inflation and cost of living, and people are feeling the pinch a lot more at the moment. So people's finances are under a little bit of stress. And well, Warhammer and the hobby as a whole is essentially a luxury product. You don't need it to live, so it's probably one of the first things that people will cut out of their lives, or at least scale back on. Yeah, we jokingly refer to it as plastic crack, but ain't nobody actually going to starve and go into debt just to buy plastic miniatures, really. So I think Games Workshop specifically are susceptible to this cost of living crisis a lot more than pretty much a lot of other industries. So for me, their financials are pretty much on a knife edge right now. Even if they start making more profit than they used to, it might be that the stock market is just going to go down because they think it's a luxury product and you're not going to get as many sales. So it's going to be really fascinating to see what comes out. But beyond all of the financials, I think there's a pretty big elephant in the room that Games Workshop need to start considering. They probably are considering it, but maybe it's time they need to start acting. And that obviously is 3D printing. Now, I'm not going to bore you with an explanation of what 3D printing is. I'm presuming a lot of you, if not all of you, already know, but suffice to say that 3D resin printers specifically are becoming cheaper and better, and they're effectively becoming more available to people in terms of ease of use, general availability, and they're just becoming more well known about. If you'll have watched any YouTube, you probably have seen many YouTubers talking about 3D printing because obviously it's affecting the hobby in quite a massive way. And I think it's a risk that Games Workshop need to address in one way or another, but I think ultimately it might hurt hurt them no matter what they do. It's such a disruptive force to the industry that it may just hurt them, and there's nothing they can do to ever like get back to the heights that they had, the effective monopoly that they had. The same hobbyists that boost their profits during COVID, well, they'll likely be the same people who might cause a bit of harm to Games Workshop going forward, because if you're at home and you're a hobbyist and you can buy a 3D printer and print any model in the world, basically, the range of your options is increasing drastically and the cost isn't really that bad and the quality is effectively quite similar at this point. Well, as a hobbyist, it might be worth you buying a 3D printer and just printing the models that you want. If you're only interested in painting models and just having that a feeling of accomplishment and that kind of thing, then 3D printing might be a great option for you. Now, do keep in mind that 3D printing at the moment is effectively still a hobby in itself. Quite frankly, it's still quite a big faff for a lot of people, myself included. I still find it a little bit frustrating, right? But as that gets easier, cheaper and better, more and more people will pick it up. So if you have that range of models that you can print, are you then going to keep buying Games Workshop plastic models? Maybe, maybe not. Some people definitely won't. So that's going to hurt Games Workshop almost without them being able to do anything about it. Now, there are still reasons to buy Games Workshop models. Like, quite frankly, the models are still great. As I said, 3D printing is a bit of a faff at times, but I think with Games Workshop, a lot of people simply like the lore, the community, and effectively just the whole universe that Games Workshop presents. But if you're somebody who just enjoys the hobby, well, your model options are going to greatly increase if you get a 3D printer. And I don't think Games Workshop knows what to do about it. Okay, so let's just say that there are some hobbyists who are going to buy a 3D printer and they're going to slow down and not buy as much Games Workshop stuff, right? I think that's probably already happening to some extent, but maybe not quite a massive extent at the moment. But let's just assume that that's happening. The next group that really are effective are the gamers. Now, I'm separating hobbyists and gamers there, but just bear with me, I'm simplifying, obviously. And quite frankly, when it comes to gaming, buying a 3D printer and proxying an entire army is probably, well, at the moment you could buy the printer and print an army for probably the cost of a Games Workshop army, right? But the minute you want a second army, then printing that with your current 3D printer, it becomes way more cost effective. Essentially, there's an economies of scale there. The more you print, the more value you get from your printer. Quite simply, if you have a 3D printer and you print like 5 tanks or 5 massive creatures or something like that, well, the cost that you paid for your printer and to print those might even be equivalent to what you would pay at Games Workshop. Like, that's how high Games Workshop prices are and how cheap 3D printing is becoming. Now, this might not actually work with competitive gamers, but for casual players who are just playing with their friends, family, or maybe like a local wargaming group or something like that, a 3D printer and printing an army where nobody's going to like say like, oh, that's not the right Games Workshop model, well, it just becomes more viable. Not just in terms of cost, but again, you still have that range of models so that your army can be as custom as you like. Now, I mentioned competitive gamers, and they're a little bit like trickier essentially, because if you're a competitive gamer and you're going to events in a store or maybe like in an official GW tournament, obviously there's going to be some sort of expectation that you're using the official products to some extent. And in that world, you probably don't have many options. Yes, you could maybe try and print an exact replica, but that just seems like dodgy. I don't think I would be okay with that morally myself. But overall, what can Games Workshop actually do about it? One thing that they already currently do, which I think is sort of handy for them, is that they sell you rules, which may sound very boring, but it is what they do. They sell you books and books and books, right? Probably too many books in my opinion, but it is what it is. Let's face it, Warhammer 40k and Age of Sigmar are pretty much the two biggest war games out there, and people are buying the updated rule books and all the army books and all that kind of stuff, so they can always make a little bit of money from that. Whereas you compare it to like one-page rules, the rules are free, but people are playing Games Workshop for other reasons. Another thing that they currently do is that they sell their IP. You know, there's games like Total Warhammer and Space Marine where they've basically sold their IP and they're raking in money effectively for doing nothing apart from owning the universe, right? So their IP has value and they continue to sell that. But what can they do with somebody like one-page rules effectively eating their dinner with 3D printable armies? Well, one thing they could do is try and concentrate on the playing space. So I mentioned events and tournaments and stuff like that. They could definitely look to increase that activity, be it holding more competitive tournaments, be it holding more casual playing spaces, something like that, where you're effectively forced into using Games Workshop products to have a good time. Well, not that kind of good time. That could be something they look into in the future. They already have some shops. Maybe they could cut down on the actual model space and try and make more gaming space, something like that. But really, even if you do that, it's not really going to affect the casual players, the casual gamers who are just playing with their friends and family at home. Like, you're not really going to affect those because they're not just going to go into your space. You would have to tempt them in. And maybe you could do that in various ways, to be fair. But I think those casual gamers and the hobbyists, Games Workshop, unless they do something drastic, are effectively just going to let that slip away and see how much of an impact it has on their sales and their profits. But if things start looking really really, really bad, then I think we will see Games Workshop at some point act on it. They'll move into the digital world and the 3D printable world. It's just a case of, we're not going to do it unless we have to. I would not be shocked if they have a contingency plan if things start really going away from them. And maybe that contingency plan is, yes, they might sell 3D models, they may even sell printers, they may sell all sorts of stuff that I can't quite envision at the moment. But as I said, I don't think that's something they want to be jumping into right now. They're waiting as long as they can. But basically, Games Workshop are in a really tricky position, and they risk being out-innovated in effectively their own market. They sort of remind me a little bit of a story about Kodak, right? The camera maker that Pitbull really likes to go on about for some reason. Basically, their cameras in the old days used to use film. I'm not going to explain what that is to you kids out there, but they were making a lot of money off the film for their cameras. However, a team of theirs basically created a digital camera, but effectively they suppressed it and they never promoted it because they were making money from film and they didn't want to lose their profits from the film. Well, obviously other digital camera makers were not in the same boat, so they just sold their digital cameras, and digital cameras basically took over, and so have mobile phones now basically as well. I worry that Games Workshop are effectively Kodak without realizing it. 3D printing is the digital camera, but Games Workshop are still on film. I think it's inevitable that the space will change. Whether or not 3D printing will actually hit that tipping point of actually hurting Games Workshop enough that they really have to change, the jury is out. We'll have to wait and see. But for me, something will change, and it feels like 3D printing is definitely at least the start of it. What will Games Workshop do? We'll find out, I guess. Let me know your thoughts on what you think will happen to Games Workshop in a couple of years. I don't think this is going to happen in the next year or two. I don't think Games Workshop are going to be like, hey, we're releasing a 3D printer. As I said, I think they're going to let it bite them first, and then they'll try and fix it because they think that the bite might not be that big. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Like and subscribe. Definitely though, have a most beautiful, beautiful day. Goodbye.